Yo, what's going on, Tank Clan? It is your boy King Ty next here, back with another video and a couple of things. Happy Thanksgiving to all of those who celebrate it, and another thing is shout out to Neptune for helping with the how do you say it? With basically planning out this idea, and they basically got their own content as well. They are working on their own Twitter stories, and I would strongly recommend that you check her out. She's even trying to do like a big crossover baseline with these other guys who I helped So here's how things would go here. Naofumi would have lived a pretty average life for the most part. He would have been a college student, and he simply ended up finding himself over to the bookstore one day, or the library. He would have decided to look through the books over there, and he would end up coming across an interesting book talking about the four cardinal heroes, whatever that meant. And while reading this, he would notice when it came on to the shield hero's part, for some reason it was blank. He was wondering if this was a mistake and decided to flip through the pages. Every single one of the pages for the shield hero was blank. He would question why this was the case, until all of a sudden he just blacked out. When he woke up, he would find himself in a completely new room. He would look around and see three other guys similar in age to himself, but each one of them was holding a different weapon, similar to those of the book that he was reading before. One was holding a bow, another was holding a spear, and the last one, he was wielding a sword. Naofumi's right arm would be covered by a shield. By the time he noticed this, he would be incredibly surprised. He was wondering if he was dreaming or something, but no. It would be revealed to the four that they were actually the legendary heroes from another world. The four would end up being led to the throne room right after, where they would end up meeting the king of this country that they were transported to. The king would go on to state the purpose for why he summoned the four here. The reason being, because of the fact that there is this prophecy, a prophecy about the waves, and how only the heroes could actually do anything to really help defend them. They had already gone through one of the waves, and they were just barely able to survive the last one. So this was why they ended up bringing the heroes here, so that they would be able to help them survive the waves, be able to get through these waves and allow them to have a fighting chance. He would ask the heroes to introduce themselves, with Naofumi being the only one to actually get skipped over, in which the king would get called out for. The king would pardon himself and have Naofumi introduce himself right after. Naofumi would get his proper introduction, and the king would just wave him off afterwards, talking about status magic right after Naofumi was finished. He would also mention the whole ordeal regarding their legendary weapons. The four would be escorted to their chambers for the time being, and where Naofumi would immediately begin to sit on a bed and just scroll through the skills that he had as a shield hero. He wasn't expecting much. He knew that as the shield hero, when it came onto attack points, he probably wasn't going to be there at all, but maybe there was going to be like some sort of balancing mechanism here. Every single thing within the skill set seemed pretty plain though to Naofumi. Sure, his defensive stats were incredibly high, but everything else was pretty much lacking. He was hoping that there was going to be some balancing mechanism, and one skill did actually interest Naofumi. This skill was titled as Predator. He assumed it might have just been a magical skill to balance off the fact he had little to no attack points, which he would not be complaining about if that were truly the case. He was interested in this skill now. He wanted to try this skill out as soon as possible. It genuinely seemed interesting to him. He was hoping that it wouldn't turn him into like some brute or that other type of predator. He would also find out he and the other heroes from different universes, or at least alternate Japans, after they went on to state who their presidents were, and even when they weren't convinced after that, they would begin to just asking random questions and everyone would be saying their answers all at the same time, realizing that each and every one of them had different answers. And the heroes would come to the unanimous decision though that Naofumi by default was the weakest out of the group right after they had finished up with this whole debacle regarding them being from different universes. Naofumi would try to defend himself, although he realized that when it came on to the shielder class, they were pretty much always the weakest class in the games each and every single one of these guys played. Naofumi would defend himself by mentioning how he might actually have a balancing mechanism added into a skill set to make up for how seemingly weak he was, at least when it came on to all the rest of his stats. They would ask for him to prove it, and he would simply say that, well, this skill that he has is called Predator. He doesn't really know much about it just yet, but it would be quite interesting to use one day, to actually be able to use the skill and see what it can really do. Maybe it will give him some leverage over the others. Although they did not really believe him, they would just think that maybe this guy is just trying to save face. The other heroes would simply just think that, maybe Naofumi is just trying to save himself from embarrassment. Nobody would ever want to admit that they were the weakest out of the group after all. But the next day, Naofumi and the rest of the heroes would find out from the king that he had prepared several party members to join them. The adventurers would actually be the ones joining the heroes though, with not one of them actually choosing Naofumi. Naofumi at first thought that they were going to be the ones to choose the adventurers to join their party, but no, the adventurers would choose the heroes, and he was surprised, of course, to find that nobody, absolutely nobody, decided to join him. Naofumi would accept these odds though. He would understand that this was probably going to be a bit harder because of the fact that he was a shielder class hero and nobody really wanted to be part of the party that was seemingly the weakest. But he would plan on showing everybody that they were wrong about him. He would plan on showing that he had potential, even as the shield hero. Since, well, he did have this balancing skill provided within the shield, he was going to make the best of it. Naofumi would be given 900 silver coins by the king, and he would be off on his way. The other heroes would only get 600 silver coins, due to the fact that Naofumi had 0 party members while they at least had a couple. After exiting the castle, Naofumi would find himself entering a weapon shop, and where he'd buy some armor and attempt to pick up a weapon, but get electrocuted in the process, with a warning signal appearing in Naofumi's view. It would state that Naofumi picked up a weapon other than the shield, and that this apparently went against the rules of the weapon system. Naofumi would obviously be quite annoyed with this, but since there was no issue with picking up armor, he would settle with that for now. After buying some chainmail for a discount of only 120 silver, he would leave the castle walls and find himself in a valley of grass full of monsters that went by the name Orange Balloons. It was an odd name to say the very least, but he would find this to be the perfect opportunity to test out this skill, Predator. Naofumi would first use it against one of the orange balloons by grabbing them. The green gem attached to the shield would begin to glow, absorbing the orange balloon. It would have taken about 10 seconds to complete the absorption process before an analysis of the being appeared in front of Naofumi's screen, or vision, which would surprise the young adult. He would gain 1 experience point from that monster, and Naofumi would find that he could also mimic some of the abilities of the balloon, only to find that all that was worth mimicking was, well, its strong bite. He supposed that he could probably put that to great use later on. Maybe if he leveled up this strong bite ability enough times, he could probably just bite through steel. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. He would absorb a couple more, adding a bit of experience to himself, and he would also test out the bite ability, popping a couple of these orange balloons instantly. He would send the droppings to his shield, which would be added to his storage. Naofumi would make his way to an inn and purchase a room for himself. He would store the rest of his silvers into his shield and take off the chainmail. He would rest it on a chair before going to sleep. Naofumi wouldn't have been aware of what was happening behind the scenes though. What ended up happening is that he would actually get robbed. And when he woke up, he would wake up to see that he was robbed. He would exit his room in order to look around, hoping to find the goons who decided to rob him and maybe just pursue them, teach them a lesson or something. But knights would instead fill the hall. Naofumi would inform them of the situation, but they simply ignored what he said, and they would grab him by the arms, dragging him to the throne room after he confirmed that he was the shield hero. Naofumi would still be in his undergarments, and spears would be pointed at him. He would be confused as to why he was dragged here, and he would look around, spotting Motoyasu with his chainmail. He would immediately call out the blonde for stealing his armor, saying that he would have never expected for the blonde to actually be a thief. But Motoyasu would brush off this comment though. He would state that it was actually a gift from one of his party members, mine. The two would begin to bicker until they were interrupted by an announcement of all of Naofumi's charges. Mine would accuse Naofumi of trying to violate her when she got lost from Motayasu's group for a bit. She would have ran away from Naofumi though, eventually finding her way back to Motoyasu. Naofumi would be confused as to who this girl even was though, until he remembered that he noticed that she was whispering to like some knight earlier on his first arrival. He never really thought much about it at first, but now he's having second thoughts. Maybe this girl decided to land some sort of trap on him. He wasn't sure, but he knew that he did not touch her or anything. He didn't even know this girl at all. He knew that she was just telling a bunch of lies, but from the look on Motoyasu's face, it didn't seem that he was catching on at all. Ren, the sword hero, would immediately call cap on that though. Ren would have recalled how Naofumi was willing to work alone, and how he showed more concern over learning how to work that balancing mechanism of his than anything else. He even recalled the shield hero being alone pretty much the whole day until the very end too. Itsuki, the bow hero, would actually back up Ren's statement. Motoyasu would accuse the two of victim shaming and he would try to call them out for not believing Mine's side of the story. The two wouldn't shift their gaze at all. They wouldn't shift their opinions. Nothing would actually change in either one of the heroes' statements though. It would be three heroes against one. The king would begin to sweat, realizing how he had just ended up putting himself into a tight position. The revelation of Mine even being the king's daughter would seal the deal, with the three other heroes now no longer actually believing a word the king said. Mine would have face-palmed after she accidentally let that slip out, when she had just sent Dad into the king instead of simply saying, "Oh, your highness," or something. And this was after she was getting pressured into a corner. She was trying to call out to him in desperation in order to make the shield hero look worse. The sword and bow hero would force the king to lift the charges against Naofumi. Word would still spread across the city about what Naofumi supposedly did, but the other heroes would actually have Naofumi's back here, going on to spread their own word about how Naofumi was falsely accused. Hearing this, more people would actually be more inclined to treat Naofumi with a bit more respect, although they would still be wary of the shield hero. Naofumi would get better deals though, thanks to the other two heroes believing him and helping to clear his name. Naofumi would end up passing by the weapon shop once more, where the owner would actually pin him to the wall. He was angry at Naofumi, although the other heroes were stating that these rumors were false. He wanted to hear it from Naofumi himself. He would look into Naofumi's hollow eyes though. Those eyes would tell him everything. They would confirm that Naofumi was indeed innocent. Before Naofumi left the walls of the capital, he would buy some more armor and a cape. Naofumi would go on to fight and absorb more balloons until he reached level 2. Once he had reached level 2, he had actually managed to unlock the orange and yellow shield. He would head back to the city in order to sell the skins, and he would actually manage to get a better price here without even having to convince them with the orange balloons at all here. Naofumi would also unlock the leaf shield the very next day. he would find that it could actually improve the quality of herbs. With this shield, he would also find himself just simply absorbing all sorts of herbs, analyzing them, and processing them to where they could actually be sold to a medicine shop. The medicinal shop owner would actually buy his herbs at a much higher price than he would ever get for the balloon skins. Within a span of 2 weeks, Naofumi would continue absorbing all sorts of materials and taking down balloon monsters. The skill, Predator, made Naofumi's victories over said monsters go a lot faster. He would manage to make it up to level 18 here. He would encounter a red balloon which he simply absorbed as well, although they were more difficult to take down. Naofumi would find himself going deep into a forest after defeating the red balloon. He was curious as to what could be beyond there, and he would end up finding himself entering an alleyway. A suspicious looking man would be on the other side. He would offer him a deal of a lifetime. Naofumi's eyebrows would raise. He would be curious as to what sort of deal this could possibly be. And of course, Naofumi would just go on to buy himself a servant, which oddly enough was apparently legal in this world. Naofumi, although he did have, the ability to actually fight here, it still wasn't going to be enough. He still needed party members in order to further develop himself if he ever wanted to have a chance against the waves. Naofumi would have a great amount of money here though, which would allow him to be capable of buying more than just one servant here. He would get Raftalia per usual, but he would also invest in a dragon demi-human and a tigress demi-human as well. The cursed seal would be placed onto all three of the girls, and Naofumi would be on his merry way. Naofumi would ask for the girls' names, with the seal shocking the three girls when they simply tried to ignore his question. Raftalia would be the first to introduce herself. The tigress demi-human would be the second to introduce herself, with her name actually being Ren. And in appearance, she would actually resemble Sophia from Reincarnated as a Slime, except for her having blue stripes instead of black and wearing rags. The dragon girl's name would be Wendy, and she would have had white lavender hair, deep blue eyes, and also be in rags. They would make their way to the weapons store, where Naofumi would have the three pick out weapons for themselves and a reasonable price, of course. Raftalia would simply get a small dagger, while Ren's eyes would light up as she grabbed a pair of sickles. Wendy would go for a pair of spiked gauntlets. The shop owner would give the girls some clothing as well, free of charge. Naofumi would thank the man, and they would make their leave. The four would visit the tavern after hearing Raftalia's stomach growl, making the girls become curious as to why he was treating them so kindly. After all, he was their master at the sort. It's like, when it came on to slaves and how it was in this world, they would never actually expect to be treated well by their masters. So why was Naofumi going out of his way in order to feed them? It made no sense to them, in all honesty. For the rest of the day, the group would be hunting in the forest, with them leveling up along the way. By the end, Naofumi would have actually managed to level up to level 22, while the girls would be measly levels 6 and 7, with the Dragon Girl of course being the highest ranking one out of the three. Naofumi would spend the night compounding medicines until he could create something to help against colds. He would give that medicine to Raftalia specifically. After she woke up in a panic, he would comfort the girl after her panic attack, hearing her call out for her mother and father. The rest of the group would wake up after her second panic attack though, and of course her multiple other panic attacks after that one. The group would have honestly a pretty poor quality of sleep that night. Naofumi would sell the rest of the medicine he compounded last night and sell more balloon skins afterwards. He would create a ball for the girls after noticing Raftalia was showing a keen interest in the toys that other kids had. They'd make their way back to the forest, continuing to kill more monsters and leveling up along the way. Naofumi would order 2 rooms at a local inn after the lack of sleep that other night. One room would be for himself and the other would be shared between the 3 girls. They were allowed to play with the ball outside. Raftalia, though, she would end up getting picked on by some kids who would try to force her to hand over the ball to them. Ren and Wendy would get in the way though, and they would scare away these bullies who tried to pick on their teammate. Ren would say to Raftalia that although she could be a pain to be around sometimes and that she was very annoying because of the fact that she kept on waking up with panic attacks last night. She was willing to forgive her for that because of the fact that they were teammates that Naofumi specifically selected. Raftalia's eyes would widen hearing this. She would feel a sense of warmth and camaraderie from that statement. Naofumi would have watched the scene play out from the window and smile seeing this. He would treat the 3 to a meal of higher quality than the usual, also being a bit on the more expensive side as well. He would also give the 3 haircuts while absorbing their hair into a shield. I know, kinda creepy, but it would actually unlock new shields in the process. The group would go back to the forest once again, this time encountering a monster that resembled an animal. Naofumi would understand how slow to action Raftalia was though, compared to the other 2, and request for her to specifically kill the monster. She would remark about her fear of blood but get shocked in response. She would be forced to kill a monster, getting blood on her hands. Another organic monster would appear, which Naofumi would have the other 2 make quick work of before he ended up absorbing and analyzing both corpses. Naofumi would walk over to Raftalia and explain the situation to her. Her hands were shaking, but he would try and let her know this. If she could not perform, then, well, he didn't want to do this, but he would have to eventually let go of her, since he needed strong individuals within his party in order to fend off the waves, or else she would be dead weight. She would simply be holding them back, and she wouldn't want that to happen to them, would she? Hearing this, a wave of determination would hit Raftalia. She would no longer have a pale face. They would continue killing off more Usapo and cooking some of them for supper during the night, with the girls remarking how the food tasted delicious. Naofumi would feel as if he was eating tasteless rubber though. In the morning, Naofumi would stop by the weapon shop in order to upgrade the girls' weapons after they broke. Raftalia would have upgraded to an iron sword. Ren would have actually gotten her hands on a double-edged scythe. When it came on to Wendy, she would have went for a pair of gauntlets with retractable blades. The shop owner would offer to teach Raftalia the basics of swordsmanship, just in case she didn't know how to wield one already. Naofumi, hearing this, would actually agree to that. Hearing the growls out of the girl's stomachs, though, Naofumi would be forced to leave to get them more food. By the time he arrived back, Raftalia was in the middle of sparring with the other two girls. She was almost done with the basics and practicing her skills so far against Ren and Wendy. The shop owner would hand Naofumi a block of whetstone. He would explain that it was meant to help with sharpening blades, but Naofumi's shield would glow, absorbing the block instead, surprising the shop owner. An analysis screen would appear for Naofumi, and it would form into a new type of shield. This shield was apparently meant to be capable of sharpening weapons in seemingly an instant. The shop owner would test this out by placing a rusty blade in one of the slots of the shield. Once he saw the results, he would be quite impressed with how it came out. Naofumi would be allowed to leave with the absorbed item for free. Naofumi and his party would make their way to Ryut village. There they would end up trying to sell more items, but he would get quickly annoyed once he found out that his items were significantly less valued here. He would have gotten significantly worse deals. One of the merchants would actually inform Naofumi of how there was actually some sort of mine that he could probably go to in order to get his hands on some valuable items. Although there was a catch to this mine. What ended up happening was that with the last wave, several monsters ended up making their way over to that location, and that's where they ended up staying ever since. They had yet to ever try and attempt going back to that mine ever since that event, but Naofumi was willing to take up his chances against these wave monsters. It would be good practice for whenever the real waves came in. They would find the coal mine. They would find that the coal mine was actually near a mountain, and they would loot an old rest station for the map of the layout and old mining tools such as a pickaxe and rope. Naofumi would take said items and actually absorb said items, which would actually unlock the airstrike shield. They'd follow the map in order to find the ores until they encountered a two-headed dog. Raftalia would look on in fear and freeze. She had built up so much confidence up until this point, but Ren and Wendy would be the ones to do their best in order to fend off against the creature. Naofumi would interrogate Raftalia about the issue, and he would finally understand where all this fear was seemingly coming from. Naofumi would go on to state that she needed to be strong in order to prevent the deaths of others from happening. Others that she cared about, since she was too weak to help out against the Cerberus that day. Raftalia would gain new resolve hearing this, and she would charge forward, striking the two-headed dog in the chest, impressing Ren and Wendy. Ren and Wendy would actually go on to strike the two-headed dog and other vital areas, while Raftalia focused on landing strikes to the belly region. The three would successfully kill a monster, and Raftalia would gain a boost in confidence after that event too. She would have gotten over her trauma. somewhat at the very least. Naofumi would absorb the remains of the animal-like monster. He would also go on to collect some ores by the name of light metal, absorbing them into a shield as well. Naofumi would feel stronger after absorbing the two-headed dog, and he could not necessarily explain why though. Over a week would pass after that event, and Naofumi would have gained several additional shields from absorbing all sorts of new materials from this coal mine. Porcupine would catch Naofumi off guard though, and Ren would actually be quick to slice the animal in half. Naofumi would absorb the deceased creature, analyzing its properties, and he would use this moment in order to actually test out something new. Up until now, he was simply applying it to his shield, but he thought that there was a chance that maybe, just maybe, he could mimic some other properties of whatever he absorbed. So Naofumi would mimic certain properties of this animal, finding that he could copy the pines that made porcupines harmful. It wasn't necessarily him actually turning into the porcupine though, it was simply him gaining new aspects to his physiology, you could say. Raftalia, seeing this, would still request for Naofumi to purchase stronger armor though, since those pines really only added to his offense, not necessarily defense, and it could serve as a hindrance in certain instances. Naofumi would reluctantly agree to her terms, especially when the others began to gang up on him about the issue. The party would stop by the weapon shop, and Naofumi would make a custom order, handing over the material needed for it. The shop owner would compliment how the girls had become fine ladies too, which would leave Naofumi in confusion. He wouldn't have seen a difference in any of their appearances, so he didn't necessarily know what the shop owner was talking about. Naofumi would also buy the girls magically enhanced versions of their weapons before leaving. Naofumi would go on to collect his order the next day. The shop owner remarked on the fact the dragon hourglass could actually count down the next arrival of one of the waves, and hearing this, Naofumi would make his way over to the clock tower with his party following along. Once they made their way over to the clock tower, he would have realized that it resembled that of a church after hearing about that possibility. The group would be escorted to the Dragon Hourglass by a nun after she confirmed his identity. The clock would be counting down by minutes now. The other heroes and their parties would also arrive to the same area as well. Motoyasu would attempt to mock Naofumi's outfit, but Naofumi would show absolutely no reaction here. Motoyasu would then try to flirt with the girls in Naofumi's team, only for each one of them to reject him, stating that they were with Naofumi. This would surprise Motoyasu. Naofumi would be on good terms with the other heroes though, so he would simply be asking about how their journeys had been going so far. The three would simply be catching up until the countdown reached 0, which would teleport everyone to the location of the current wave. Deep red cracks would form in the sky with monsters falling down from there, attacking Ryut village. Naofumi would be in the mid-40s in terms of levels, with his team not falling too far behind, being in the high 30s. He'd focus his attention on Ryut village, while the other heroes would be focused on attacking the source of all of this conflict. Naofumi and his team would split up once they made it to Ryut village. Raftalia and Wendy would be rescuing the civilians while Naofumi and Ren, they would be the ones to actually take down the monsters. Naofumi would go on to absorb several monsters as well, using his different varieties of shields to actually defeat them. Ren would slice up as many monsters as possible, ferocious in nature. Naofumi would encounter a giant zombie right around the time Raftalia and Wendy regrouped with the others. They would fight off the zombie, putting their best effort forward. Knights would rain down fire though, as soon as the villagers were confirmed to have been evacuated, showing zero concern for Naofumi or his party. Naofumi would form a shield around his teammates. This would protect them from the fire. The leader of the knights would be impressed though, seeing that Naofumi could survive such an onslaught. Raftalia and Ren would lash out against the knights. They were even willing to actually kill them, but Naofumi would hold them back. The knights would be forced to cooperate with Naofumi as soon as a pack of monsters approached them though. Once the wave had ended, Naofumi received praise from the villagers for saving them from the wave, even bowing to him. Raftalia also looked over to Naofumi, thanking him for helping her out in order for her to become strong enough in order to save others from becoming orphans like her. Naofumi would look at her, smile, and rub her head in response. Ren would giggle at the sight of this scene. The king would have ended up having a feast for the heroes after the wave, and Naofumi wasn't all that inclined to go, except for the fact that there's probably going to be high rewards that would come after this party. Raftalia and Ren would be indulging themselves on the food there, while Naofumi and Wendy would be in the corner. Naofumi would be scrolling through the help menu while keeping a conversation with Wendy. Motoyasu would walk over to Naofumi though, with an annoyed look on his face. Naofumi would raise an eye to this. Motoyasu would go on to comment on how he found out that Naofumi's party was actually full of slaves. Naofumi would state that it was legal in this world and he treated each one of them justly. So in all honesty, he really didn't see what the problem was here. Motoyasu would ignore everything Naofumi said though, and declare a duel against the two of them. Naofumi would refuse at first though, until the king would force Naofumi to accept the duel though, despite the pleading of Raftalia. He would see that Ren and Raftalia were getting cornered by the knights, which would have frustrated Naofumi to no end. He would be sure to end the match as soon as possible after he agreed to it. They made their way over to the castle garden, where Naofumi would get barraged by several attacks from Motoyasu at first. Naofumi would use this porcupine mimicry to make some room between himself and the spear hero. Naofumi would switch to the dog shield, allowing for a counterattack after Motoyasu attempted to hit Naofumi, which would have ended up only striking a shield. Naofumi's shield would have two dog heads stretched out, and they would bite Motoyasu for 30 seconds, causing him to take damage, a severe amount. Naofumi didn't end there though. He would have kicked Motoyasu in the knee before head bashing him, headbutting. He would use a shield prison against Motoyasu and tramp the blonde in place. Naofumi would take on the properties of the two-headed dog, causing him to switch from having needles to having fur and more muscle to be built up at that moment. Naofumi's speed would also be enhanced in this form, as he would sucker punch Motoyasu with enough strength behind the punch to send him flying back. Naofumi would step on Motoyasu's chest and request that he just give up now. but Motoyasu was too stubborn. He would refuse. A wind attack would hit Naofumi, but Naofumi would look around, realizing that it wasn't strong enough to actually make him move in this more beastly form. 5 minutes would pass without the king saying a word. 10 minutes would pass with Motoyasu once again failing to do anything against the agitated Naofumi, and by the time 20 minutes had passed, Naofumi got fed up with the king and he would order him to call the match already. The king would sigh in dismay, giving the match to Naofumi. Naofumi would have been given back his party members afterward, with Motoyasu not understanding how he could lose to what seemed to be a lowly shield. In his mind, Naofumi must have cheated somehow, and that he was keeping these poor girls enslaved still. Naofumi would ask the girls if they wanted to get rid of their seals. Naofumi would end up finding out that, well, yeah, two of them actually wanted to get rid of their slave seals, but when it came on to Raphtalia, she seemed to still want her own, as a representation of how loyal she was to Naofumi. When it came on to Ren and Wendy, they would have had no problem removing they would have had no problem getting the slave seal removed from themselves, saying that of course they would have more free will after doing so, and that there was seemingly no purpose beyond causing trouble nowadays either. Raphtalia and everyone would just continue on their way, while Motoyasu would be enraged, believing that he was mind controlling these girls, Naofumi, that is, or something along these lines. He didn't believe he would simply get rid of their seals if they asked after all. A new series would make itself known to Motoyasu there. This series would be known as the Curse series. And that is how we end Part 1, people. It is your boy King Ty Next, signing out. You guys already know the deal. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It is your boy King Ty Next, signing out. Peace.